Good morning. Thank you for listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville or WXND 100.9, our sister station. This is Artist Talk with LVA, and I am your host, Keith Waits. The show is produced by Louisville Visual Art. And today I want to tell you that one of our programs called the Local Muse will be at the Flea Off Market's Holiday Bazaar at the Henry Clay Building on Saturday, December the 17th and Sunday, December the 18th. And our featured artist at that event is my guest today, Katlyn Thompson. Will have her artworks on display and available for purchase. This program, the Local Muse, is an opportunity for Louisville area artists to participate in local events, festivals, and markets free of charge as our featured artist. Katlyn graduated from DuPont Manual High School in 2013 and went on to earn an elementary education degree. She is now a JCPS art teacher, passionate about working with elementary students to cultivate a creative, trauma-informed, and equitable culture for our future artists of Louisville. And but Katlyn, welcome.
Welcome there. Thank you for having me, Keith. I'm super excited. I'm excited to
I'm
be
happy to meet you. You know, it's fun to do this show because sometimes I am meeting the person for the first time. So it's like there's nothing but discovery ahead. So let's talk about, so you're going to be at the Local Muse at the Henry Clay, this holiday bazaar. So let's talk first about the work. I've been looking at your stuff on your website, and it seems like there's a kind of a range to all that, although I think there's a definite sort of a tone of whimsy, and your stuff seems like fun. What kind of work should people expect to encounter if they come visit you at this event?
well. I definitely have a lot of, I think for events, I bring like things that are definitely more whimsical and fun because there are layers to my work. I even have a bunch of onion stickers because, Shrek references and life has layers and all that fun stuff. But I have these little guys here. So I try to make mini works of fun things. In 2019, I did those Inktober challenges, and one of the days was Wonderland. And I dreamed up in my Wonderland, there were turtles that nested in the clouds. And ever since that, it's just like bloomed. And that's mainly the work that I bring to these events are very aquatic. And for some reason, the sky and those two things merge into one and become just these beautiful landscapes of turtles and manta rays and other animals in the sky flying around doing their thing, that kind of stuff.
Now, how would you describe your visual style on these kinds of things? And I say that knowing full well that a lot of times, I think art always tends to be categorized and classified. And of course, here we are talking on a show that's going to be on the radio, so the words are sort of important. But how would you describe your style and your visual style?
I do a lot of mixed media. I've gotten really into painting lately, but I also really love embroidery. So when I'm creating a lot of these things, I like to look for ways I can use embroidery to exaggerate textures. So in a lot of the pieces that feature turtles, they're cloud nesters. So I use embroidery techniques to add where they're laying their eggs with sequin and French knots. And it's actually been something that has allowed me to connect with people who I have not expected. So like, for example, there have been people who have visual impairments or are fully blind that come to my booth and enjoy feeling the texture of the eggs that have been embroidered on those canvases. And that wasn't something that I had expected as an artist, but that I'm glad that I have been exploring how to merge medias that I'm in love with because it's allowed me to connect with people that I would have never expected before because that's, not how I was expecting somebody to experience it. And I'm so thankful to have made that connection with them in that way through art.
So do you mean like it might be people that are visually impaired, or maybe people that are maybe neurologically impaired, and they find that the touching and interaction is much more meaningful?
Both, because that's actually why I enjoy adding the texture because it's something that satisfies me, even with like the touch and the look of it all together. It's just kind of like so multi-sensory that it just adds another level to art, because I know typically it's just meant to be seen and there's a lot of taboo with, touching art. I'm not encouraging just to go around and, touch anyone's art, but it is something that I definitely like to explore with my work, and, kind of taking it in a little bit more like maybe a non-traditional, direction in that way. So
So instead of hanging on the wall, maybe it's something you keep around so you can pick up and touch and
almost fidget. Yeah.
like a fidget.
Yeah, because I actually make these tiny ones. So like I think like this would be perfect for like a desk. Like
Mhm.
those places, like trying to bring art into places where it's hard to get. I think it's called third space, where you have room for those extra things.
Mhm.
And like, your office space, is a place where you spend a lot of time. And I'm in a school, so I'm around a lot of people with offices, and it's just like bringing tiny little squares of happiness into your life wherever you can put it, kind of thing.
Well, and when I look at your work, some of the stuff, like I was just noticing on, I was just looking at some images on your Facebook page, and there was the one of the pigs, the pig who were waiting to wiggle. Was that what
Yeah, yeah, that my piggies need to wiggle.
wiggle?
Yeah.
Which is, so they're toes, but they're piggies.
Yes, actually that started with a drawing of a foot, and then I like right below it is a drawing of little pigs, and it just kind of progressed to that. I don't even know why, but I guess I'm a fidgeter, so my leg might not be shaking, but in my shoe, my toes are doing all of this, that kind of thing. So they're just kind of ways, I guess maybe I stem, or like nervous habits that I have, that I kind of try to add some humor to, because some people feel a little bit of shame in those things. And I think today people are starting to talk about those habits more, and to feel less shameful about stimming if you're not neurotypical, you're a neurodivergent person, and you have those habits and little anxieties and things. And it kind of helps me smile a little bit more and show up as my most authentic self in these situations.
I think a lot of people don't understand what neurodivergent really means, and I'm not sure that I do in terms
Yeah.
of what does it say in the dictionary, but I'm
Mhm.
sort of imagining, I think our language has been about, specifically about things like autism, and then we talked about the spectrum and people's place on the spectrum, and it seems like um, neurodivergent to me, I'm not a scientist, uh,
Mhm.
is that area of the spectrum where people are what was called very high functioning, and they're very active in society, but you just have this, whether it's because you were talking about being fidgety, I don't know, and I know a lot of people, who might be like that, uh but then in other words, they're not the behaviors or the characteristics are not something that is necessarily profoundly recognizable. You don't sort of like necessarily, you just sort of see, and maybe it's quirky, you know.
Yeah, I get called quirky.
Of art, we know is just like a part of the people that we're, whatever. We're all artists, it all works.
Right.
Does that sort of fit? Does that sort of make sense? Am I sort of on track?
Yep. I would, yeah. And like, cause I can't necessarily say I have like a solid, definition, but I feel like that's about the direction that I go when I think of being neurodivergent. So
Mhm.
I would definitely agree with you.
Okay. Well, I was just wanting to know, because I realized, like, I've been seeing it around, and it's like it's one of those things. I don't know that I've really yet had the opportunity to just be talking with somebody and saying, like, so is that you? Do you accept that term as something that applies to you? And but I like it because it somehow, even though it's very scientific sounding, it sounds very embracing. It sounds very, like it's and I would think a scientific term would try to, you know, push you aside or make you feel like another, but it's really, I feel like it's the opposite. It's sort of
Right.
like reaching a level of understanding.
And even when I'm like working with my students in my classroom, not all of them learn the same way, and that we all have different needs. And I don't know, some of them like teaching them the difference between like you got to stand when you do stuff. That's fine. This kid can sit here and like focus in on this painting for a really long time, but this one will be standing by his chair and like doing a little dance and doing his thing, because that's just how they like regulate, I would say. And I don't know, seeing that with working with 500 students a day and how different we can all be, and embracing how what this individual will need is never going to be exactly the same as what this individual needs for their, success. And what you need for your own success might not be the same for the person, like your best friend. And that's something that I think growing up was hard for me to kind of navigate and understand. And as I've gotten older, leaning into the things that make me who I am. And I listened to this other podcast called, or his name is Andy J. Pizza, and it's Creative Pep Talk. And he talks about turning your neurodivergence into your superpower. And I think that's something that I have done in those ways, because there's a lot going on in here. And somehow I get it all going. And I don't know how I manage, creating my art and teaching all at the same time. But somehow here we are.
Well, when did you know you were an artist? I mean, we all in the first our early years, we all finger paint and then pick up a brush and go through things. But when did you? I'm wondering if it was pretty early. When did you kind of think like, yeah, this is it. This is what I have to do?
My stepdad always challenges me with this like nature versus nurture kind of question, because he truly knows I was born this way. And my dad grew up, I was always asking him questions, how do I draw this? Or how do I do that? And I was obsessed with origami from a very young age. And I've made these flowers, and they've become a part of a big piece of my work, because it's the first thing that my dad taught me how to create. And he's no longer with me, and it's how I kind of appreciate that connection he's helped me cultivate to my creativity, because I have been sculpting since I was in elementary school. I have been drawing. I've always counted colors, which is like a technique to calm yourself down. I've learned as an adult. Now that's what it's called. When I was little, I would always kind of take a breath, go into school and look at the sky. Even on a gray day, I was always just kind of looking at like the values or the, colors I could see in the sunrise. And, when I would go into school and finish my math after whatever it was I just did, I'm drawing sunsets on the back of my papers, which is very similar to what I do now. So it doesn't surprise me that my work has gone in the direction of taking all of these really cute animals that I love and putting them in a situation where they're flying through a sunset or a rainbow, because those are things that I've done my entire life. And it's always been a way for me to, I guess, look on the bright side of things, because, I work trauma informed, because I have my own traumas and things that I've dealt with in my life in regards to my relationship with my father. And art has always been my way to kind of explore that as well, and allow me to, I don't know, I guess almost survive in sometimes, I would like to say. And I'm thankful that I feel like I have had this from the start. It's always been there for me in a lot of ways.
So you were doing it probably for very sort of obvious pleasures of just sort of like, but it sounds like it was also creating art, making art was very, very substantial coping mechanisms for you that you developed organically. It's interesting. You were talking about like the technique of counting colors. So you were just doing that just sort of intrinsically, you knew to do that, just something that happened. And then later you have seen that it's actually, am I correct in that it's actually sort of a technique?
Yes, to help like calm your nerves, like, and it's, which is, it's like comes full circle sort of thing. I think when you're growing up and everyone asks, what you want to be, and you're like, well, I don't know. I like to do these things. Does that make me an artist? Does that make me this? Does it make me that? I don't know. And to see who I am now, it all makes sense. And when my students even say that to me now, when they say, I'm gonna be this when I grow up, I'm like, what? You already are. I already see you doing it. This is you. This is a part of who you are, whether it be professionally, you know, oh well, but I can see that this is a love that you have and something that you already carry. And I think that comes from seeing people as full of like those things already versus empty cups. And that's just a whole pedagogy and teaching and sort of thing that I really lean into as well. So
Well, did you always think you would teach? Was that also a sort of a natural evolution for you, or was that something you had to decide and think about later when it came time to go
um,
to?
I don't think I grew up thinking I'm going to be a teacher. Um, I chose teaching because I've always been interested in working with people. I like being around that energy of learning because I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner. I'm always learning something new. And so I didn't think I was going to be an art teacher for the longest time, which was what I think is ironic. I just was like, no, I don't think I don't think I'm good enough to do that for some unknown reason. And so I went for elementary education, and that's really what I focused on. But I'm really glad I went that route because for whatever reason, it has gotten me to where I am. And I'm really happy with the journey that I've been on and the connections that I've made with my students along the way. So I don't know. I think teaching found me, and I think my father was also supposed to be a teacher. So I know it sort of runs in the family, but I'm also the first from my immediate family to graduate from college as well. So it was a big step in the right direction, I think, for me. And I, I don't know, I'm just thankful again. I keep saying come full circle, but that's just everything feels like it's all accumulates into the little things accumulate into one big moment sometimes.
Where is it you teach? What's your school?
Shelby Elementary.
And you did spend some time doing, what's the word you used when before we started recording, that you were doing a more general curriculum? You were doing.
I taught first grade for 3 years, and then since then I've taught art. This is my second year. With the pandemic, there's like been like half years, and time has been lost. So
Well, and I noticed that everybody would say like, because I've heard people say like, well, for 3.5 years, and I'm like, well, it hasn't been 3.5 years yet. It's been 2 years, and like it'll be 3 years in March. And
right.
so then I'm saying like I've been saying 2.5 years for 6 months.
Mhm.
It's like there's a real. It seems like there's a need for us to sort of codify our pandemic calendar in some way that it
Yes.
always because it really messed with our sense of time, I think.
Mhm. It messes with me all the time. I feel like this year has just flown by, and even comparatively to like last year, that was like my first year back into the classroom. I mean, and that was a whole roller coaster in itself, and navigating like all the COVID rules and getting acclimated back into being in the school building with all the students. And this year, I mean, the energy at the beginning of the year was like electric, and it has just not stopped. I just feel like it has came and gone so quickly, and it's already December. So 2023 really snuck up on, I think, everyone, it seems like.
Well, you say you've been teaching, so when you started teaching art, was that right when the pandemic happened? Or how?
So 2020, I was teaching first grade, and then I switched when that school year ended. So yes, I've been teaching art from 2020 on.
You
So I
started,
began virtual, and it was so weird.
that's what I'm wondering, you know, I mean, so you started your art teaching through the computer.
Right. So strict.
I
And
know.
not very, like, the students didn't really understand how to, you know, navigate all of that. So it was a lot of sketchbook time though, which I think is really cool. That was something I learned and that I love to learn about my students, was how many of them had their own sketchbooks at home that they were already just drawing all day in. And so we really leaned into that a lot while during the pandemic.
And they were elementary kids. Was that something that parents did you find that parents had found that a useful thing during the pandemic? Like give them art stuff, give them blank pages to work on?
Yes, I think so, because it's just something that they like to do, and they can have a lot of voice and choice and use a lot of their imagination without a lot of adult, you know, being control, I would say. So
Well, I'm encouraged though that there were a lot of parents who were buying art supplies and not just sticking people and sticking screens in front of them.
right, right. And
Uh,
that, I mean, yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I would hope so, at least.
I mean, you know, the screens are great but just a certain number of hours a day. That's it. Like,
Yeah.
limited. Um, so going back to like the work you do, the things I see, I mean, it does seem like there are some, I saw some things, and again, it's very limiting to look at even a good website. And it's one of the things I always say that I preach on this show. I say almost every show is that you never really understand an artist or their work from their website. It's just a way to get a glimpse into it. You've got to go to the gallery space or wherever, you got to see it. In this case, we're saying you have the opportunity to see Katlyn's work at the local Muse on December 17th and 18th. But because it can be so different. But I do see some things that seem like more, I don't want to say more serious, but let's say less whimsical and maybe more contemplative sorts of landscapes. But you know, then we look at things like the pigs wanting to wiggle, which that seems to be very characteristic of your work, and it's very fun. It's silly in the way, and I think silly is a great word that people shouldn't look down on. I think sometimes people are like, if it's silly, it's not meaningful, it's not worth looking at. Do you find, and I don't agree with that, I think silly is a very important part of our experience and can be captured and expressed, and it's not superficial, it's actually just a part of our DNA. But do you ever have reaction where people maybe don't take your work seriously because they see that whimsy and that silliness, and maybe they don't take you as seriously as an artist?
I think so. Yeah. And I think that's why I challenge myself to show up almost so authentically, because I want to challenge that sense of how people frown upon being a little more silly, like you're saying, because I think there's a lot of space for that, especially today. Things don't have to be so traditional all of the time. And I like to make space for people to laugh. But a lot of my stuff is a lot of puns. You know, I have my piggies need to wiggle. There's another sticker I have. They're hippies, and it's a little pea pod and they're little peas that I made into hippies. So, and then I actually make those little guys and I bring them into my classroom for my students to like sit and work with. So they're just like peace people, but they're people made out of little peas. I think this is a little, I don't know if you can, it's a little hippie, he has a little afro, he's really cute. So I've made those out of clay since I was like, I've had those around since I think I was 10 years old. I've made those little guys. Those have just been little things that I've carried throughout my life.
You still
But
make,
I still make them because why not? I have little fairies that I hide around Louisville as well for people to find. They have different themes. I made fall ones and I make little acorns that they hold. Um, and that's been a bizarre ride in itself. But every June, there's a national event where people make mushroom art and you hide it all over the world, and you could register where you hide yours. And so I make little mushroom fairies, and they are holding like little Sculpey mushrooms, and you can find them throughout Louisville. And I also every now and then plan months at Birmingham Forest, where I make a bunch of fairies and hide them with all the trolls for kids to come, for whoever to come and find. Sometimes people start moving them through Louisville and they'll send me pictures of where they moved the fairy to. So that's fun too. So
so when you place one, is there some sort of tag or something that tells them it's you, and that when you say they send you pictures, so they can communicate back to you?
yeah, sometimes I try to leave tags with them. Just it says finders keepers on there because I think I hid one and then I heard someone being like, can we take it? Is this free? So I try to put little tags that say like this is like a little free fairy, like finders keepers, and then it says like you can move me or keep me and like share a picture if you find it kind of thing. So it just tags my Instagram. But just because I'm curious and a lot of people share that they found them. I've actually made some really deep connection through those that I just like really didn't expect. I made a pair of twins one year and I remember waking up and being like, these are fraternal twins. And I don't know why that thought occurred to me that morning, but like I had decided because their pipe cleaners were two different colors that they had to be fraternal instead of identical. And I placed them in a park and took a picture and, rode my bike back home. And then like within 10 minutes, I got a message on Instagram of a twin and she had just lost her brother and found the twins together, like where I had placed them. And it was just all of these really unexpected connections that I make with my art because it's so healing to me and to get to be a part of somebody's healing process. And at the time, I had just lost my best friend to like an extreme medical condition. So that was just like such a meaningful connection that I made in that moment and just encourages me to keep kind of doing what I'm doing because all of these unexpected happy moments have come from me being my most authentic and creative self with all these silly things that people might not get but give me warm and fuzzies.
Well, you know what, it strikes me. I'm fond of saying, I said this the first time many years ago. I thought, oh, that was actually a fairly profound thought. but that I feel like a lot of times I look at adult artists and that sometimes what they're trying to do is get back to the unfiltered way of doing things that you have as a kid, the way you do art as a kid, with whatever kind of sophistication of materials and presentation or whatever, but they're trying to get back to that place. You watch artists that learn to do very well crafted representational imagery and things like this, and then they start to find their way into abstraction or expressionism, into these other, and I always feel like artists are trying to get back to that perspective, but I feel like you have sort of maintained that all along. Like you never quite lost your childlike perspective on your art. Does that seem a fair thing to say?
Yeah, that's actually funny that you say that because my boyfriend and I were watching this documentary and I can't remember the name of it, but there's a clip and an artist, he's like walking backwards and like doing all these really funny things. And he even says, like, I think one of the most, he's talking about how adults let go of their like childhood and like those like most innocent times of our lives where we're so open to things. And I just think I've held on to that my entire life. And that's just, you hit the nail on the head, I have to say. I agree with that completely.
We all, there's a point where we feel like we're in such a hurry to grow up and we feel like we know everything about the world at 18 or 19, and it seems like we're so intent on putting childhood behind us that we sort of squelch it. I know I don't mean to, this isn't true of everybody. But I don't think it's the norm. I think you're an exception in that way. And I think maybe a lot of creatives are like that they've either kept in touch with something or they've rediscovered that sort of natural creative expression that they had when they were children, that you can just, so it's like, I can't imagine you making art and not having fun making art. I mean, I'm sure you get stressed and something doesn't work.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 but it's just the way it is. But that it just seems like you couldn't do it without it being fun.
Right. It's a part of the process. And even when I'm doing something that like is from some of like my deepest places of like things that I'm healing or like trauma that I'm going through, it's still fun. Like it allows me to explore all of the things that I love, and even just the act of creating is just fun for me, and I couldn't imagine it being any other way.
Well, and that also then makes you, it seems like, a natural fit as a teacher.
Yeah, I am proud. I actually shared this with my students, and I really wasn't expecting them to do anything, but like they were like, okay, Miss T, okay. And I was like, thanks, guys. And like they're my fifth graders, so some of them are a little more like stubborn to be a little more open, but like I'm so silly with them that they have a good time, and they just are as happy for me as I am for them. And that's something really special that I am thankful to have and share with my students. So.
Well, and the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was, so, in looking at your website and stuff like that, your website is called Hippie Going Psycho, correct?
Yes.
Let's see, is it .com or let's see, I've got it up here. Well, the URL doesn't really show it very clearly, but anyway, Hippie Going if you type that into a search engine, you can only find you, right?
I believe I've done it a few times. I believe I'm the only one. I haven't found another one. I've done a couple Google searches, so.
Well, but I guess it's like I think it's not that I can't sort of see it, but I'm always curious, like, so, because hippies were a thing of the late 60s going into the early 70s. So, but what is your sort of connection or identification with that, and because you don't seem psycho.
I love that you're asking me this question.
But you're kind of, you're unorthodox, you're maybe a little bit eccentric, you're things we expect to see in artists, and you're having a lot of fun. But hippie going psycho, so how do you identify with being a hippie, and then what's the psycho aspect?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in this little thing. I love that you're asking me that specifically because you also asked me about my playlist covers that I design. So this started when I heard a Post Malone song. And I thought when I heard it, I thought he was saying hippie going psycho. It was like the first time it came on the radio, but he was saying my EP's going psycho. But I decided from then forward that he is saying hippie going psycho, and then I like that better. So that's where it started. But my entire life, people have asked me if I'm a hippie, if I'm a flower child. And like, that's just how people have perceived me. I'm like, okay, I guess I am. But also that has its own like impression of me that that's just what I get from people a lot of times. So, I'm okay with it. It's typically a good thing when they're asking me that. But even like our maintenance man at my school the other day stopped me and he was like, "Are you a hippie?" And I was like, "Mr. Kevin, I think so." So it was just, so it's a question that I'm still being asked. And then I always just call myself a crazy lady. I don't know. I have pictures where like I'm walking through my school building and I have like all these papers and I'm just like making things so extra and so much that I'm just like, don't mind me, don't mind all this craziness. Hot Mess Express has a plan. You just gotta let it happen. So it's just kind of leaning into that silliness, and which exactly goes back to what you were talking about with all that too. Um, and just kind of makes me giggle. So, and it sounds good. So, and now every time the song comes on, I'm like, hippie gone psycho kind of thing.
Well, that's so funny. Is there's a whole trend of mishearing lyrics. The most common one is the Jimi Hendrix song that people thought he was saying, "Excuse me while I kiss the sky," not "Excuse me while I kiss the sky."
Wait, one more time, say run that back, because that's really funny that you say that, because there's a song called Kiss the Sky Out Now by Wycliffe where he says, excuse me. It sounds like he's saying, excuse me while I kiss the sky, but maybe I'm also wrong about this lyric.
But in the Jimmy, it's Purple Haze, and he goes, "Excuse me while I kiss the sky," but millions of people apparently heard it as "Excuse me while I kiss this guy."
Oh, this guy. Oh, I could see that one. Okay, that makes sense. There's another one that my cousin ruined for me. There's a Selena Gomez song, and she says it's at 14 carats. And my cousin pointed it out, and she said it sounds like farting carrots. And that's just what I hear every time now.
Well, I think it's. I have no judgments at all about hippies, because I was alive during that period, but I was too young to ever be a hippie. But
Right.
my time in high school was sort of a post hippie, but I can see it. I can see the aesthetic. I can see it in like just the way you dress. You got the long flowing hair, but also in some of the color choices you make, and some of your color choices. There's a couple times I'm going like, wow, she's really pushing. It's hard to explain this, but if you know like the way art is talked about and taught in art college and art schools, it seems like sometimes you're pushing your color in a way that probably instructors would have like not been fond of.
Because I didn't go to like in a traditional art college
Right.
at whatsoever. And I think that's kind of what I mean when I say like making space for those sort of, and challenge those like typical way of thinking about art and defining what it should look like.
Yeah. Well, it's always interesting to me because I did spend time in that sort of environment, and there are very certain ways you're taught it, and it's not that it was. I don't think most good art schools aren't restrictive, but they do teach within a certain sort of frame.
Mhm.
And I've looked at a lot of people's work in town and just thought to myself, and I wasn't ever sure how to express it. I thought, boy, they'd hate you in art school. They'd hate this in art school. This would somehow violate some sort of, like your stuff is kitschy, or your stuff is or something. I don't mean I'm not describing your stuff, but that stuff and I think there's a lot of self-taught artists that I've talked to, particularly lately, and they didn't do color theory, and they didn't do all these kinds of things, and so their way of using color is it's natural, and it is sometimes very bold and vivid, and I don't know how to say, because it wouldn't meet the academic taste.
Mhm. And that's funny that you say that too, because I think that's something, even as an elementary art teacher, that like I try really hard not to say what their things should look like,
Yeah.
because I don't want someone to tell me what my thing should look like without, there's constructive and like, growing something and like developing a thing. But, I try to stay very, objective to what they're creating, because, I feel like as someone who did not go to the traditional art school, that's something that I think about a lot. And I don't want to put that extra pressure on my students so young either.
Right. Well, when they're young, they shouldn't. I mean, if they
Exactly.
they want to work within an academic framework, there's lots of time for that later.
Exactly. We're just trying to have a good time and create some art.
Sometimes begs the question when I talk about adult artists trying to get back in touch with their childhood sensibilities is, you know, and maybe these art programs are one of the things that beats it out of them a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
becomes a you know, look, hey, education is great, everybody should go to art school if they want to do that, but I do wonder about that sometimes, as if you get pushed into certain kinds of approaches or over intellectualization and things like
Yeah.
that, and the
Yes.
joy gets lost. So,
Yes. I
well,
agree.
I think we'll end on that note. Katlyn Thompson, who never lost her childhood joy in making art.
Thank you.
Katlyn will be our featured artist in our local Muse booth at the Flea Off Market's Holiday Bazaar at the Henry Clay Building, Saturday, December the 17th from 11 to 6, and Sunday, December 18th, 11 to 5. And again, it's because it's this time of year, whether you come to this or not, do your Christmas shopping locally, go to galleries, go to places, buy local art. It's always a good gift. Always. Well, Katlyn, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.